The 2024 Porsche Macan EV is coming very close to production, and we now basically have photos of it that shows it pretty much with no camouflage at all. So it's very cool design, because when I look at this, yes, it does have the trend of the decade in the front end, which we're gonna talk about in the design section of this video, but the proportions doesn't look like an EV. Not just in the greenhouse and the overall proportions of the side view, but also the wheelbase has this standard internal combustion engine wheelbase, which looks better, in my opinion, than having that very short overhang in the rear. Still looks like a proper Porsche. So before we jump in and have a look at this from a front, side, and rear from the photos that we do have now, and also different wheel designs that we have that will probably make it into production, let's have a look at this article from Car and Driver, because they have tested this, specifically the range. They can't really talk about how it drives yet, but they went out and tested this for the range. So I'm going to link this down in the description as always. So the 2024 Porsche Macan EV prototype range preview. We have a go in the pre-production version of the electric Macan to get an idea of its potential range. Now, Porsche stressed here that these were prototypes, vehicles that did not have final suspension, steering, or brake tuning. It still looks pretty much ready when it comes to the stance. Maybe this wheel sits in a little weird angle here. I'm not sure if that's just a camera lens or if it's actually cambered like that. The rounded shape in combination with the dark finish makes the new EV look smaller than it actually is. And it definitely, I think it looks a little bit smaller than the normal internal combustion engine Macan, and I think that has to do with everything is so clean here. I think this is maybe, dare I say, more Porsche-like than the actual Macan that's in production today because of the simple lines. And we also have more of a fastback design, which we're going to talk about in a minute. You have an approximately 100 kilowatt-hour underfloor battery, sits down here way low, that provides around 90 kilowatt-hours of usable energy. And the headlights are set vertically just below in the front fascia. And this is what I talked about, the trend of the decade being bumper headlights. We do actually have, I think this is the first Porsche to actually have bumper headlights in a production car. Porsche also can't hide the tires and the wheels, which are Pirelli Scorpion MS Elect All Season. For the base model, you have 20s in the front and 20s in the rear, even though they're pretty fat in the rear. 285s in the rear. If you go up to the top model, which Porsche calls it right now, they don't have a specific, or they probably have an internal name for what the top model is going to be called, but for now it's called the top model. You get 22s in the front and 22s in the rear as well, with a little bit wider, I was going to say weirder tires, but wider tires in the rear, 295s instead of 285s in the rear. Looks very cool. I do believe that these silver ones are the 22s and the black ones are the 20s. I'm going to show you both. You have two permanent magnetic synchronous AC motors power all-wheel drive Macan EVs. There will also be a rear-wheel drive version, but it's uncertain that will come to the US market. And unlike the Taycan sedan that has this two-speed transmission, this has a single-speed direct-to-drive gearbox, and the maximum output for the top model is going to be 603 horsepower and 737 pound-feet of torque. I do like these numbers. I do think these numbers make sense for this type of vehicle. It doesn't make sense to have 1,000 horsepower in this car because it is, again, it's not a Cayenne big SUV EV. It's a normal size EV. We don't need 1,000 horsepower in every single EV. Even though 603 horsepower might sound like a lot, you have to keep in mind that EVs are a lot heavier than internal combustion engines, so this will still be a pretty fast car, obviously. The Macan EV will have an 800-volt electrical architecture, refill its battery from 10 to 80% in just 22 minutes. Again, that feels like the standard these days, but you do need, of course, a DC fast charging station for that. Now, Porsche is not a huge fan of one-pedal driving. You do have a choice between a coasting sailing mode when you let off the gas and a light regen setting that merely mimics the familiar feeling of a gas-powered car engine braking. It still regenerates, but I'm not sure if they take advantage of that fully. So Car and Driver did run a 75 miles per hour for 3/4 of the drive at that speed. And after covering 251.6 miles, our base model Macan had 30 miles left and 11% battery. And the result here would be 280 miles for the base Macan EV, which is not bad at all. Because again, Porsche has an advantage here a little bit because the Porsche design language in general is a very Pretty bubbly design, and it is a sleek design with not a lot of sharp curvatures too. That's just the Porsche identity that they had since the 60s. So they do have this advantage of that working with, you know, the range for the car with these sleek surfaces. And here you can see the 20-inch wheels, which I am not a huge fan of. I do think the wheels, they're probably a little bit more comfortable than the 22s, but I'm not sure, you know, gloss black, just a flat, you know, disc on the wheels, it just doesn't look good to me. I definitely prefer the 22s. So with that said, let's jump into Photoshop here and have a look at the photos that we do have right now for the Porsche Macan EV. And I do think, as I said, I do think this is one of the better looking EVs that will go out on the market, I think, for a 2025 model year, because it is still a strong identity. It clearly represents Porsche. There is no mistaking this for anything else than a Porsche when you look at this car. And look at these proportions. I could not tell if this is an internal combustion engine or an EV, because the wheelbase down here, we have a clear sporty Porsche front fascia with these more rectangular lights now, instead of having it be the traditional round Porsche lights that we're used to seeing. Maybe not so much in the SUVs anymore, but I do think it looks good. We have these 4 LEDs in the front end. That's been a pretty clear identifier for Porsche. Instead of having them be bulbs or dots like we used to have, they're now 4 strips of LEDs. And down here is where you can see we have the bumper headlight integrated in the bumper. But in this case, I think it actually looks maybe more natural to have the headlight down here than in most cars that have these bumper headlights, because we have a very strong identifier up top, and that the top part is always the daytime run lights, where we want to put the identities of the car and make it recognizable both day and night. And I think having those 4 LED strips being separated from the headlight itself is going to give it this identity that we're looking for. We have a pretty static framing for the graphics down here. I do like this design here as well, this wing cutting in to the lower section. Super sleek, this design. You can see the 22s right here as it's rolling. It looks a lot better, in my opinion, than the black ones down here. These are the 20s. Just wanted to show you this view. It's pretty much the same view, but with the base 20-inch wheels, which has this gloss finish to it. It looks like we have one sharp line here in the hood itself, creating a bit of sharpness in this otherwise very, very fluid design. You also have a sharp line down here to create some more mass that would dig out from this lower section to make it a little bit more nimble, a little bit more athletic. But again, there's no mistaking this for anything else than a Porsche Macan when you look at these proportions. Now these are I do believe these are the 22-inch wheel. Unfortunately, it's cut off right here where you can see the dimensions of this car, of this tire. But it is a 255 in the front end, and this, I'm pretty sure, is the 22-inch wheel. It looks great, this wheel, because we still have a sort of traditional Porsche styling with the Fuchs style for these wheels, but they're still open here, so you can still see some of the discs, even though these parts are covered up. I think it's a cool design, having a splash of silver in this car, specifically when you have it all black like we have right here. It just gives it a bit more contrast than what we have if we were to have the 20s all black. Now, I wanted to show you this, to just pop in the regular Macan here. The reason why I think the EV looks more Porsche like. So we have the roof line is what I want you to focus on here, with this sloping line dipping down very hard here in the rear and then never comes back. We do have an integrated spoiler here in the back that pops up in typical Porsche SUV fashion. You can see that the Macan internal combustion version does have a roof line that goes further up here and doesn't dip as fast as it does in the EV. And this design here, I think, looks more traditional Porsche than the Macan that we have in production today, even though I do think that is also a very cool design. I've always thought that the Macan looks a lot better than the Cayenne, even though the Cayenne has gotten a lot better looking over the years. The first one was just a disaster, but now it actually looks pretty good. Another photo here that I just wanted to throw in, because here we can see the charge port. It's actually sitting and charging here. You can also see more clearly this section at the bottom here, cutting out some of this mass that we talked about. We don't really have a sharp shoulder line, because putting a sharp shoulder line in a Porsche would just be a no-no. We don't do that. It's always supposed to be rounded. Looking at the rear end, here you can see how the rear spoiler is now deployed. They're going highway speeds here, and this probably pops up in about 70 or something like that, 65. You're always going to have a button on the inside if you want to manually pop it up. What I do like about this rear end is that we actually do have a couple of framing lines that cuts through, again, this sea of softness and roundness in the surfacing, because we have this line, which is a typical German line going back to the Golfs, for specifically, where you have the taillight sitting here, and then you have this waterfall design coming in and creating this bumper at the lower section. We also have a much nicer diffuser, in my opinion, that we have on the internal combustion engine, because I think the facelift that Porsche did with the Macan, where they created this massive diffuser, it takes up so much space back here in the new Macan that I think it doesn't look natural to the new. I do prefer the pre-facelift rear end of the Macan just for that simple reason. Here it still sticks out pretty high up, but it doesn't feel unnatural for some reason. We also have the taillights looking very slim, and as you can see, they're stretching out this design in both spaces, in addition to this big muscle that we have here, creating a nice sumo stance looking at it from a rear end. I feel like I have a good idea of what this Macan is going to look like. Overall, from what I see from these photos, even though it is a little bit more covered up in the rear end, I still think this is going to be one of the best looking SUV EVs for 2025.